Steam Next Fest Summer 2023 is upon us, and as always I'm diving into various demos for different genres of games, seeing what tickles my pickle. This video is all about racing and driving related games, and I'll be telling you what the game is, what I enjoyed about it, if I didn't enjoy it, why, and whether or not the game is staying on my wishlist or not. I put everything that I play onto my wishlist, and then it's up to me whether or not it stays on there and comes off. We're kicking off with Super Woden GP 2. Now, I loved the original of that game, of this series. There's a review of it on my channel, and this feels like a much more cohesive and polished version of that original. This is a asymmetrical styled view top down, which I know some people might struggle with, but what I liked about this is that in the first game, because it was all about getting a Scandinavian flick of trying to get your car to kind of round the corners, and it was quite difficult to hold on to, Super Woden GP2 seems to have toned down the difficulty and made the car a little bit more stable and predictable as you go around the different types of terrain. So there was gravel, there was asphalt, there was ice in the demo. They all handled differently. They all felt natural to drive. And I think some of the criticisms that people had of the first game was it was just too leery. This is definitely toned down, but it's still got the great aesthetic. It's still got the online leaderboards. It's still got the retro synthwave soundtrack. So, chef's kiss in terms of the retro vibes. And now the handling still feels unique and gives Super Woden GP2 its own unique vibe and feel as you're playing it. But it's much more approachable, and for that reason alone it's staying on my wish list, and I'll be absolutely picking this up on launch. Next up is a game called ArcRacer, and this looked like a Gaussian blur CRTV filtered low poly wipeout. That's a very niche description, I appreciate it. But I was pleasantly surprised with how this other Wipeout F-Zero clone handled and played. Yes, the aesthetic kind of feels like a downgrade from those top tier versions of this style of racer, but what I really liked about this is, unlike so many other games in the genre, the tracks were proportionate to the speed of which you're driving, because quite often you just smash onto the sides of all of these tracks when they're really poorly put together. ArcRacer felt like it was built and designed for the speed that you were playing at, which was really appreciated. The other thing I quite liked is not only were the AI quite competitive, but the way it wasn't focused on weapons so much. You was picking up power-ups that then contributed to a boost or a nitro. So that was quite cool to play around with as well, particularly in a track where it was quite wide, but there were lots of neon signs that were closing off lanes. So you was constantly feeling like you had 4 lanes to play with, but 2 were almost always being blocked out. So it would really filter you down, and everyone was trying to filter into those lanes and then branch back out again for a nitro burst to try and get in front of someone and then tuck back in again. I quite enjoyed this one. It's staying on my wish list. Appreciate quite a lot of people probably sneer at this, but it was a thumbs up from me. Going full old school kart racer now, we've got the Karters 2 Turbocharged, which reminded me a little bit of Speed Freaks on the PS1, which I appreciate might be a bit of a niche reference. The reason for that is because it was all about jumping and creating stunts to get a boost, because whilst there did seem to be a drift mechanic that was charging something up, it didn't seem to trigger on the demo for me to actually use the drifting to speed boost out of it, so it was a bit odd. I don't know if that was a bug or something that needed to be fixed. The moment-to-moment gameplay of the Karters 2 actually felt quite fine. It lacked a little bit of personality, and I felt like that was the problem across most of the demo here. Less around the tracks, but more around the characters and the feel of the game. It felt quite just by the numbers. But a couple of things did have me cause for concern with the amount of characterization, customization and characters that all seem to be behind, or look like they were going to be behind, currency paywalls in this game. Now, in-game currency, absolutely, but this felt extremely like it was being built around season passes. I have no actual proof of that, but it did make me go ugh as I was going through the menus. Thankfully, the moment-to-moment gameplay is perfectly fine and pretty good, actually. And the thing that stood out most for me about the Karters 2 was the track design. And that's because there were lots of different forking paths, sometimes at the same levels, sometimes you'd have one going high, one going low, sometimes there were multiple shortcuts, but designed in a way that it made it quite difficult for you to use them all. So it kind of meant that you was choosing the shortcut that made most sense for you at that time. So yeah, quite enjoyed this. It is staying on my wish list. I will be keeping an eye out for what the kind of battle pass, online pass or in-game currency monetization of this game will be, which I think will ultimately decide exactly how I feel about it in the long term. The next game on this video is Smells Like Burnt Rubber, and this reminded me of the PS2 game Mashed, but nowhere near as fun or as well put together. Now obviously this game's a demo, but quite often you get a really good feel about what they're going for in terms of handling for the cars. And this was where one of the main problems of this game came for me, because it was floaty, but also fat at the same time. I can't think of it. It was like driving hippos on roller skates, because it felt like the car wanted to drift constantly, but it didn't have the turning circle to do so. So it just kind of warbled its way out around corners really, really slowly and imprecisely. So whenever you got to hairpin bends, you couldn't really drift or handbrake turn around them. It didn't work. When you was trying to go around 90-degree corners, you'd kind of have to swinging wide and hope for the best, and that would scrub off too much speed. So it just felt like you weren't going fast, but also that you wasn't connected to the road or the floor either. I didn't like the way how some of the tracks felt like it was moving behind a lot of the scenery. I didn't like the fact that the amount of power-ups that were being thrown around were all a bit all over the shot. The nitros didn't really work very well in this game either. It felt too stingy. And so, yeah, I came away from this really unsatisfied. This isn't staying on my wish list. I do think others will enjoy this game though, but the handling model and the way how this is designed just didn't click for me at all. Another game that didn't work for me was RC Revolution. This game is like a proper retro but jolly RC buggy style game, and I've traditionally quite enjoyed these in the past, but there were a couple of issues with this game that really confused me. The first was the way how the tracks were designed, particularly when you were dropped into a street that had multiple roads, but they weren't all cornered off and the minimap wasn't helpful. So you was kind of having to guess exactly where you should be going, and thankfully I was right most of the time, but sometimes I'd end up off on a weird tangent. The other problem that I had with this was particularly around what happens when you hit something. So whether that be a box or a road hump or a jump or a ramp, whenever you went up into the air, God knows what the physics are with this, but you was off wonky everywhere. When you landed, you couldn't land on four wheels properly, so it'd shoot you off somewhere. Elsewhere, when I was going onto tracks like being on the beach, the AI would kind of get stuck on me and I couldn't unpick myself from it. And so you'd end up stuck on top of another car and then you'd have to exit out and try again. There was just a lot to be desired with this game, and it really struggled to feel enjoyable. And perhaps it was one of those ones where the demo's gone too early, but this wasn't a game that I particularly gelled with at all, and it's not staying on my wish list. The third game in a row that I won't be keeping on my wish list is Bikeout, and this is a shame because it started off really well. This sees you play in a normal push bike, and it initially dropped me into a town environment for you to just kind of go around, ride the roads, do some jumps, and just see what you wanted to do. But there was nothing to actually do inside this environment. So whilst it was initially impressive for a couple of minutes and got you up to speed with the way how the physics of the bike worked, there was nothing actually to do there. And then when it kind of took me away from that, it took me into downhill, down mountainside obstacle courses. And these were atrocious. They put you into these really narrow gated areas. So as soon as you get up to speed, the bike just looks really odd. And it's actually quite jarring because of the way how the kind of camera is constantly going bop, 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 bop everywhere, making me feel quite ill. But also, as soon as you kind of hit a jump, quite often that's at a really tight corner, so you end up falling outside of the signs and thinking, ugh, I'm now outside, and it automatically makes you fall off the bike and then you've got to start again from scratch. It went from this wonderful open world environment with absolutely nothing in to these really, really tight, claustrophobic mountain runs that were utterly unforgiving. And it just left me feel frustrated and really confused as to what this game's supposed to be doing. And so I've taken it off my wish list because neither side of that demo scratched any itch for me whatsoever. However, I do think if you enjoy those kind of open world, just go around and mooch around environments, perhaps Bikeout might be a game that would interest you. Okay, time for some positivity, and this game is called Engine Raw, and it's staying on my wish list. This game is a post-apocalyptic, almost Mad Max style racing game, and I really like the vibe of this because it was dirty, dusty, it felt like it was gritty, and at any point it could have turned into some kind of Destruction Derby style game because there was a lot of roughhousing as you was trying to get around all of the different tracks. I do think I do have some concerns about the longevity of this game potentially, but the core basics here of decent handling, relatively well stylized graphics are all here. I just wonder what else it's bringing to the table outside of this initial kind of demo, but the fundamental like racing experience of this game worked, and that's why it's staying on my wish list for now. The next game that stays on my wish list is Stunt Derby, and there's a specific reason for it. Well, two specific reasons. Firstly, you can have up to 100 AI bots racing you around a track at any one time, and secondly, all of the scenery in said racing track, which is procedurally generated, is destructible. So imagine my delight when there's 101 cars all barrelling towards a massive ramp with loads of destructible houses for you to smash through. There was a really good vibe behind it of like unhinged chaos, and whilst there is a lot to be desired around the way how this handles and drives, it felt quite slow, it was quite buggy, a lot of the AI kind of ended up upside down and confused and driving off the wrong corners, and there's probably a lot to be desired around the procedural generation too. Fundamentally, there is like a gleeful, chaotic vibe and energy that comes from this game that I was very much enjoying, and watching 101 cars barrel towards something that will be smashed to pieces, well, that kind of scratches an inner part of my soul that wants to see what happens. So absolutely staying on my wish list, but not as a more from a chaotic perspective rather than an actual driving one. Equally chaotic and probably more fun for me personally was Delivery Impossible. Now this game is a cute and playful take on trying to get as much of your cargo on your vehicle to your destination as best as possible. But each scenario in the demo was ridiculous. So there's one where you're trying to drag like an entire selection of watermelons on the back of your massive long tractor truck through a really, really bumpy forest. There's another one where UFOs are trying to beam you up and take you away because you've stolen one of their mini spaceships. There's loads of different variants, but they're all about making sure that whatever you've got on the back of your vehicle stays intact, and that's easier said than done. The handling for this works really well. It was really, really tricky. Think of this as Snuggle Truck crossed with SnowRunner. I think you're probably part way there. I really enjoyed this demo. I was playing for it longer than I care to admit, and it's absolutely staying on my wish list. Very enjoyable, Delivery Impossible. This next game is technically a racing roguelike, and it's called Near the Fear. The idea behind this is that you're driving through like some kind of figment of your imagination or psychology, and so there's a giant hand that's chasing you, trying to ruin your life and make more negative impacts. So every time you die, it puts more purple obstacles onto the track that's procedurally generated in front of you for you to try and dodge and survive. You can then go through various different like blue calming layers that you can then use to pulsate out and smash away all of the purple evil negative thoughts. But you're also having to do this whilst driving around very, very wiggly waggly spaghetti junction type circuits that are very difficult to navigate without smashing into walls, and then when the walls come away you'll be falling off. You've only got a few lives, and at the end of each level that you complete you get to choose an upgrade, and that could be for helping you get rid of more negative effects to a track, maybe getting you more XP, it might be increasing your top speed, lots of different things as you go along. There's tons of power-ups and collectibles that can also help you level up your character or your car as well. I really, really enjoyed the concept of this. I can see some people going, but it's not a racing game, but I was invested in the weirdness of this world. Like there's weird bits of brains and eyes just like floating around off the edge of the track, kind of watching your progress. Very creepy, odd. esoteric, and that's my kind of vibe. So yeah, very much enjoyed Near the Fear. I do think it probably needs a tiny bit less skiddiness on the controls, but that might just be because there's loads of upgrades to your car to make it better in the future. So that might just be because you're playing at the beginning of the game and so your car's not as great. Aside from that, really good fun to play and a decent soundtrack too. However, nothing prepared me for this completely balmy game that is probably my favourite on this list, and it's called DriveCrazy. The idea behind this is that you're a rally driver in Japan who gets caught up in an end-of-world alien invasion, and so you're trying to escape the end of the world using your rally driving skills. I love this concept so much. It's great. Particularly as I'm a Disaster Movie fan, so it was scratching lots of itches. So, like, you're driving through office buildings that are about to fall over and collapse, and then you've got to, like, blast out the other side. Aliens are trying to throw all kinds of weird and wonderful things at you, and you've got to avoid them. You're, like, grinding off of collapsing buildings and walls, trying to avoid, like, explosive lava pits because they're getting in your way and they're trying to cause all kinds of problems. There's a boss with a giant grizzly bear that's trying to throw things at you that you need to drive and avoid. And you're in the middle of a rally at the same time that you'd quite like to win. The entire thing is absolutely balmy. It's very arcade in the way how it handles, but there's lots of different power-ups and things that you can do to trigger as well. I did have some problems trying to get the wall riding to work, but outside of that, this was just pure gleeful fun that I absolutely loved playing. And yeah, this is on my wish list. This is a day one for me because it is crazy. And it's called DriveCrazy. Next up is Ultratoro 2, which is a cybernetic driving game where you're driving around different wires in a hacking themed racing game. So you're playing as like a piece of data, basically hacking through computer systems, and you've got to drive around 360 wires. So you're constantly rotating around these loops, avoiding various different data anomaly problems that are going to cause you to die if you crash into them. But you'll be collecting coins and chips and working out different ways to jump from wire to wire, because each track or level, so to speak, is a collection of different wire loops, and so you'll need to like transfer from one to another, and you need to do that by finding exactly where on the 360 pirouette you need to line up and then dash for. I found this game really enjoyable. There's a few games that are quite similar to that, like this, out there already that I already enjoy the concept of. This felt like a cross between a driving game and an endless runner, because you're constantly moving forward, and if you miss something you've got to go around the whole loop again to try and get it, which will grossly affect your times. But yeah, enjoyable. Did make me feel a little bit motion sick after about 15 minutes of play, so I'd probably only do this game in short bursts personally, and your mileage may vary if you also get motion sickness in games. But staying on my wish list, quite fun to play. The next game on this list isn't a driving game per se, but it is definitely a racing one, and it's called Magnitor, and I love that name. This is a bicycle racing game, but it's a board game because you roll dice and you have 3 different cyclists of different classes that you're trying to get to the front of the peloton to win the stage by the time you get to the end of the level. How you do that is rolling dice, seeing where you're going to place your rider, and then experiencing whether or not you can then push out for an all-out attack, whether you want to draft onto the back of other people and save some momentum and speed, or if you are unfortunate enough to roll a 1, for example, you might end up hitting a mechanical issue and having to park off to the side of the road and missing like a turn for a bit, which can detach you from everyone else, which means you can't draft and like consume your stamina as you go. There's a few rules that I wasn't quite getting with this, but it was enough of a curio and a weird oddity that it's kept on my wish list out of just pure curiosity. It also reminded me very vaguely of the Formula D board games, and in an absence of one of those types of games for me to play with racing cars that's on PC, like on normal platforms for you to buy, Magnitor could very well scratch an itch for people around that, so it's staying on my wish list for that reason alone. The next game on this list is a parkour racer called Pace Chasers. Now, this felt different compared to speedrunners, CD Run, all of those types of games where it's a multiplayer running through an environment, seeing whether you can like push someone else off the edge of the screen. This felt much more like a parkour speedrunning platform game where you can race against other opponents locally, but I was racing against AI in the demo. And not only are you running and jumping and like wall jumping and all of that, but you also had the ability to kill enemies at the same time. So that's why I'm saying it felt like a speedrunning platformer game rather than like a full-on like parkour experience. The other interesting thing is that there was some kind of scoring combo meter that was going on too, where the more moves that you could chain together, like wall jumps and slides or killing of enemies or dashing through breakable walls so that you could continue on your journey, it was adding up like various different points and things that you could then bank for like landing certain moves and staying on your own 2 feet for a while, which was quite a cool idea too, because it was like adding a trick score to your actual overall time for a total like high score. So there was different ways to win. I quite enjoyed this one. It's staying on my wish list. I do think probably from a casual local multiplayer perspective, things like speedrunners would probably work better for a casual gamer, but Pace Chasers will definitely scratch a niche for speedrunning platform enthusiasts especially. Alright, we're into the final 3 now, and the last game that is a pure racing game is Synthwave Racers. Now, this reminds me very much of games like Trackmania, Neo Dash, Hot Lap League, the types of games where you've got stage stunts to complete. So you'll get like a weird and wonderful path which will involve like corners, then it will have loop-the-loops and jumps, then it will have obstacles trying to like push you off, and then there'll be like increasingly complex tracks for you to try and get to the end of, and it's all about just beating certain times to get certain medals. You only have to get to the end of the track to unlock the next one, which is quite cool. And thankfully, the handling model for Synthwave Riders was actually quite solid. I did have some issues, well not issues, it just took me a while to get used to the drifting mechanics, and I think this is because as you go up the speeds, it kept on saying gear up, gear down. But I didn't see any gears actually in the game itself, but it seemed to attribute to how tight a drift you could make, basically. So the faster you was going, the rougher the actual drift was. So sometimes you just kind of understeer off the barrier and like off the track and have to restart again. But yeah, really enjoyed this. Just probably needs a little bit of less Gaussian blur when you're going around really, really fast corners, because I felt like it was hurting my eyes slightly. But that was just a minor complaint for what was actually a very, very enjoyable game, and it's staying on my wish list. Okay, these last 2 games aren't strictly racing or driving games, but they're themed in the racing world, and they are both games that remind me of Overcooked and that kind of couch co-op all working together to solve issues. And they're both the same type of game. The first is called Speed Crew, and it's around being a racing team that is trying to fix your cars as they come into the pits. Depending on how many cars you fix and how quickly you do it within the time limit scores you points, and repeatedly clearing cars within set time limits earns you a combo. Points translate to laps, which means that you win the race. So you start off with like someone might have a car jack, then someone will go and get the spanner to change the tyre, someone else will get the new tyre or repair it, someone else might be there with a hammer bashing out some bodywork, some cars might need refuelling, and then others will need combos of the lot. And so it's working together with up to 4 players locally to be able to perform that. And Speed Crew worked really, really well. Even as I was just playing as a single player, I was oddly invested, because what started off with just having one car in at one time then started to have multiple cars in with multiple problems. And it was starting to do that thing which Overcooked and Moving Out and all of the best games get packed, for example. It's around quirky level design that then causes you even more problems. And Speed Crew was starting to do that towards the end of the demo. And I was like, yes, this game understands what makes these co-op games really work and excel, and so this is absolutely staying on my wish list. And if you as a sim racer need a ridiculous like party game to chill out to, Speed Crew will definitely be the one I'd recommend. The other game that is very, very similar is called Mechanic Heroes. And again, spot the thing here, it's around having cars that you need to repair. The difference here is that Mechanic Heroes asks you to get into the car and drive it to the jacks to then raise them up. And if you hit anything on the way, it adds on an additional, you need to then hammer it out so that you can get rid of the dents. So if you must have some driving in your party games, then Mechanic Heroes is the one to go for. I didn't find it quite as fun as Speed Crew, and it was mainly because you kept on having to replenish tyres really super often, and then your tyre rack would run out, and then so a truck would arrive with loads of tyres, but that would be blocking you being able to then get cleared cars to the exit. And it felt like they were on opposite ends of the level just to annoy me, and so I spent more time running back and forth replenishing tyres than I felt like I should do. The levels were also 5 minutes long compared to the 3 or 4 minutes of Speed Crew, and I felt like that was just, it was noticeable that it was an extra minute longer, and so the fun felt a little bit more drawn out. However, this game was also still fun and enjoyable, and it's staying on my wish list too. It's just, if they both came out at exactly the same time for the same price, I would probably choose Speed Crew over Mechanic Heroes, but both are worthy of your time. And that's it, all of the racing and driving themed games from Steam Next Fest Summer 2023 that I've played. I hope that was informative. Pop down comments below on anything that you think you might pick up. I do love doing these videos, they take hours of my time, so I really hope that they're interesting and informative to you and you get something out of them. So if you do, drop me a comment, give me a like, please let me know, because it helps me keep motivated to doing this again in the future. Take care. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.